Catherine, you're on the board of a private school. Can you explain to our viewers how it is that private schools managed to qualify for the JobKeeper, given that they would have had to say that they had a 30% drop in revenue?
As far as I can understand, and certainly I'm on a school board of a Catholic girls' school in Queensland. We did not apply for JobKeeper because our income comes from the parents who pay the fees. What we did do then is canvass the parent group very carefully to help and assist those who were struggling to pay fees because they've lost their jobs. And that continues to this day. And the schools that I've been in touch with, it would appear that the schools that have applied for JobKeeper did so because they're boarding schools, and they do have costs that kept on going that aren't necessarily covered. You know, all of that, the kids were all sent home, and that was the end of that. But they certainly have certain ongoing fees or ongoing salaries that they had to meet. So I think for some of that story, it conflates an issue in the community, which David Hetherington is talking about, which is that sense that the state schools, because they're funded by the government schools are publicly funded by state governments, that is not keeping pace with the funding that is coming to private schools. And you know, if you look at it from that angle, it actually makes more sense.
Right. Now, I know that you spent years, Catherine, working on the Gonski reforms, and one of the recommendations was that schools with the governments reduce excessive payments to schools that had enough or too much, and redirect those funds to areas of great need. Yet, and we agreed on it. There was so much discussion about it, and the more we talked about it, the more we have moved away from a needs-based model. How has that happened?
Well, the original Gonski proposal was a base rate to every child. We took the principle that every child, no matter where they went to school, and remembering that state schools educate about 66% of the pupils in Australia, and then the systemic schools, mainly Catholic, and the independent schools educate the rest. So the state school does the heavy lifting, which is right, because that's the democratic process, that the education should be free and accessible to all children. And we took the basic foundational principle that a base rate sum would go to every child, irrespective of where they were in the school, whichever school they were being educated in. And then we took the view that children with the needs, where the family may have had income problems, where it's indigeneity, where English was not the first language, where there were other needs, children with disabilities being integrated into the school system, they then took on a pro rata. They took on more of a subsidy. And then that's been kind of, in some situations, that's been turned on its head a bit. And I don't think that we've got clarity as much as we should have. But the basic issue is that it's harder for the state government to keep funding their schools at the same rate as the federal government funds the private sector. And I think that's the core issue.
Tanika, where do you stand on this? I mean, we've had such a big discussion around education and the needs of public education when it came to Gonski, and yet it seems like this inexorable trend that we're barely talking about, let alone arresting. And I know you've got your kids at a private school, but does it seem problematic to you?
Oh, absolutely seems problematic. And from a work point of view as well, the Country Women's Association has been, one of the reasons that they as an organisation formed 100 years ago was because of the inequity that they saw in relation to education for rural kids. And many of those rural kids are educated at public schools. So, and that still continues to this day. There's huge inequity when you start putting rural, regional and remote schools into the mix as well. Not only in equity, but big challenges in terms of distance and isolation and getting teachers to go and work in those in challenging areas as well. And that does require more funding to address those issues. On the JobKeeper issue, I am a parent of two private two private school children, and I was, I'm not sure yet whether our school did apply for JobKeeper or not, but I was horrified to read that those private schools had actually applied for JobKeeper. That's not what JobKeeper was for, and that's not. It was in such, to me, it was in very bad taste that any private school, and particularly some of the very wealthy private schools that were mentioned in the Guardian report, would apply for and receive that funding that they did. You mentioned in your intro that funding was meant for organisations, businesses that were able to demonstrate a 30% downturn in revenue. I can assure you there is not a 30% downturn in private school enrolments across the country. So the fact that they would go and apply for that funding, which could have gone to many other sectors, many other people to support their needs, was very, very disappointing.
Danica, do you think then that those that went on to post a profit should be paying back JobKeeper as some companies have done?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's not what JobKeeper was intended for. JobKeeper is intended to keep people in jobs. JobKeeper is not intended to subsidise private schools who, yes, they will have a number of families that will be experiencing stress in relation to fees, but they are able to address those by other means, and they will get those fees eventually through payment plans or whatever it might be. These are very wealthy schools, and as I said, as a parent at one of these schools, I understand very all too well that they are wealthy schools. Yep. They do not need a JobKeeper payment. It's insulting.